My respectful obeisances to each and every one of my God sisters and God brothers and assembled members of the audience, daughters of God brothers and God sisters. You know, after listening to Jagat Purush's incredible services, which I had no idea you had done all of these incredible things, and to what extent you had been. I just knew you'd been here. But I realized I had nothing to say. But I do have a little offering that I just received from Malati Devi Dasi, who had been here in Juhu. And she could not come, but she sent a little offering with a devotee who came from Detroit. I'll start with that, and then a couple of little words. Om Yantarandasya Ganana Sakalaya Chakchum Migitam Jena Tasme Sri Gurave Namaha. So a little introduction to Shintamani. Practically everybody in the beginning of Krishna Consciousness did very heroic things that perhaps in retrospect you might never do again. I was mentioning, like I lived in a box, a cardboard box, for some time when I was in UK. In retrospect, I probably would not do that again. But anything at the moment was possible. So Shintamani was asked by Srila Prabhupada if she'd go to Japan and marry Sudama. Sudama was already in Japan. And she said yes, just like that. Just like Mandakini Devi Dasi was praying to Krishna that she could do some special service for Srila Prabhupada. And then the next day, Srila Prabhupada asked her if she would go to Russia and marry the one devotee that was in Russia that Shamsundar had brought to Prabhupada, Anantadev. And she said yes. Yeah. We just didn't use our brains to calculate things in those days. We just, yes. And things happened. So she went, and as things turned out, eventually her husband took sannyas, and Prabhupada gave her to worship Lord Jagannath deities, which she still has to worship to this day. So, they're not gigantic, but they're not little tiny, they're like this. They'll be part of the story. So she was sent, and then she was sent. In 1974, Prabhupada suggested, she didn't have a husband, but she had Lord Jagannath, if she could go to India. And she was first in Calcutta, into Hyderabad, but then they tore down the women's ashram. There's a lot of us sitting here who can relate to that feeling. And it's still an unhealthy habit going on today that they take down the women's ashrams. But anyway, she had to go somewhere. She went to Calcutta and became extremely ill. And by that point, she's thinking, go back to America. And some devotees told her, well, why not come here to Bombay, to Juhu? They said, it's just like LA. Bombay is the LA of India. So she came here with her deities. And they were put on the altar with Radha Rasa Bihari. And she also became a cook for the deities, cooking the Rajbhog offering daily and doing the noon arti, washing the plate. And sometimes when Prabhupada was in town, Palika would be cooking for him, but she'd come and take some of the maha from Shintamani's cooking. But these little, earlier today when we were hearing all those dramatic stories about all the dramas were happening here, you know, in the midst of some of the dramas, they actually had the first Rath Yatra festival here in Bombay. You remember that was being mentioned? And you might have wondered, I was wondering myself, I hadn't got this letter then, where were the deities? You know, because there aren't Jagannath deities here on the altar. So it turns out that these deities of Chintamani, Lord Jagannath deities, were the deities that went on the Rath Yatra, the first Rath Yatra here in not just Bombay, but the first ISKCON Rath Yatra in India, I would say. So that was, I think, quite a nice connection here. Then she took a few notes, and on one of the notes it said November 23rd, 1974, which is interesting because the day before the day I was coming to go to the airport to come here, I was listening to a tape which was Prabhupada, November 24th, the day after she took these notes, 1974, and it was from third canto, 324, and the topic was the importance of sadhu sangha. You know, if you want, and he said, if you want to advance in Krishna consciousness, associate with devotees. And then a couple verses later, in 25, he says, devotees who are serving. You know, not just Haribol people, but devotees who are doing some service. And then you associate with those devotees, and then you go out and you preach. And then you'll advance in Krishna consciousness. So on November 23rd, the day before, 1974, he said, we must tolerate. Devotees do not suffer when our mind is absorbed in thoughts of Krishna. If this process was too difficult, we would have said, it is impossible to stay with Srila Prabhupada. But no, they are staying. I cannot give good shelter, good food, but still they are staying here. Even with disease, they are staying. Because many devotees have mentioned how sick everybody became. The food, and she continues, the food was pretty austere, and she contracted hepatitis along with Moksha Lakshmi and Arya. We were too sick to make it to the temple, and when we were well enough to eat, no one had any time to cook for us, so we ate tomato sandwiches every day. But as soon as we were strong enough, we were right back to our service. And every minute, we tried our best to serve. One time, we were following Srila Prabhupada on his morning walk on the beach. The men would be up front, and the ladies behind him. And then she tells which those ladies were. There was Sarvamangala from England, Ambika from Australia, Arya from Canada, and Anada and Gangamai. All these devotees, except for Gangamai, are sitting over there. The men were talking about, this was also a common conversation in those days. The men were, and even nowadays, unfortunately, the men were talking about women being Maya. All of a sudden, Srila Prabhupada stopped, and we also stopped, and he said, but not the devotee women. Then we continued walking. He appreciated the women devotees. Of course, Srila Prabhupada was above bodily platform, and he accepted sincere service of from anyone, no matter their race, gender, or age. All glories to your temple and all devotees doing service to help spread Lord Chaitanya's mission in Mumbai, your servant, Chintamani Dasi. And I don't know, she sent this little picture, and maybe pass it around. It's of the former original temple, and she's standing there. So maybe we can just, pass it around and maybe get back to me at the end. So I would like to offer quick, yeah, I'm watching Shruta for the cues. I would like to offer my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to Vishwa Devi Dasi, her daughter Krishnambar, and Narottam Das, because all the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful floral decorations, all of this that you're seeing within and without, you know, you go into the temple and suddenly you're in a Vrindavan forest, even though you're in Juhu. But it was the wonderful, beautiful, creative ability from these devotees who have been here from the get-go and are so absorbed in serving Prabhupada through their talent, and are always wishing to make more and more nicer arrangements. So they're in the back there. Thank you very much. And a quick one from Aditya Devi Dasi, because those who don't know her, she served here really wonderfully. It was mentioned earlier, Srila Prabhupada's secretary, and then Giriraj Swami's secretary, a stalwart. And she has now departed last year in Vrindavan Dham. And she told me a little story that I will just relate to you, that some of the difficulty being faced, you know, the difficulty is as difficult as you want to make it. So most of the time, the ladies just took it in stride. But, you know, it wasn't abnormal for the ladies to be overlooked, you know. So one time there was a special program for Srila Prabhupada off campus, and all the devotees were invited, but nobody made any arrangements for the ladies to get there. So the ladies kind of got together and they somehow or other got themselves to the program. But after the program was over, there was no conveyance for them to come back. And they were standing together watching Prabhupada leave. And Prabhupada went out, he got in his car, and 3 sannyasis squished in the back. And then he looked and he goes, "Oh, you are not coming?" to the ladies. And they said, "Well, we don't have a ride back yet." And Prabhupada turned around and told the men to get out of the car, and he brought the ladies back. So, Srila Prabhupada Jai. Should I stop now? Is that good? No. Another face on the departed souls billboard over on the other side there, Kartikeya Mahadevya. We used to come, this was our first introduction to health food, you could say, in India. He'd come to our Akash Ganga flat and sing the glories of wheatgrass juice. Now it's like a normal thing, you can go anywhere and get it, but then that was pretty exotic, and we thought he was maybe a little crazy. But he was a sincere, wonderful soul. And Srila Prabhupada gave him a lot of mercy, and he reciprocated nicely. The one time I had been doing some deity shopping, and in some spontaneous manner in Benares, I found a small set of Radha and Krishna deities, about 10 inches, and they were very ancient. It means they were beautifully, beautifully carved. And I took those deities, and in my mind, I was thinking, maybe I will worship these deities, you know, not having any clear concept, how would I possibly do that? But I had, you know, but I took them. I didn't tell anybody, but one person knew, and that was Srimati, because she was traveling with me. So later on, Srila Prabhupada is staying, it was mentioned he was staying in Kartikeya Mahadevya's flat that had belonged to his brother. What happened, the brother died, so obviously he wasn't living in his flat anymore. And so that flat was offered to Srila Prabhupada to use during the second Bombay Pandal. And I had been doing some deity service up in Jaipur with Srimati. And the day I was leaving, I got a telegram. We were on our way to the airport, actually. And this guy ran up, he handed me a yellow paper, a telegram, said, "Bring deities, large size, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. So we'd already bought 3 sets of deities, and we had our tickets. So I said, Srimati went ahead, and I stayed back with my daughter, and somehow very quickly located a beautiful set of white Radha and Krishna. Got them packed, and got them onto the lorry to come down to Bombay. And then my daughter and I also rode the lorry because we didn't have a train ticket, we'd given it up. And we arrived here in Juhu really early in the morning. And nobody was expecting us, and nobody was expecting a great big lorry. This was during the tent era when you were staying in the tents. And they unloaded the lorry, and somehow Prabhupada found out we'd arrived, so he requested that I should come with the deities to where he was staying at Kartikeya Mahadevi's place, the big deities. So Mahamsa Prabhu, at that point in time, was one of the few persons that actually had a driver's license and knew how to safely drive in India because, you know, he's a Bombay fellow. And he was deputed to drive me, the deities, and my daughter to Srila Prabhupada's place at Kartikeya Mahadevi's. But what was interesting is that the deities were brought up, and we put them in the living room, which we weren't using. It had all the furniture that we weren't using stuffed in there. And Prabhupada came in, he saw the deities, and he said, bring them here. And he wanted it in his room, right in front of his desk. And then he said to me, hold out your hand. So I held out my hand, and he took a ring off his finger, and he dropped it in my hand, and he said, now see if it fits. And it fit into my middle finger. So then, a little later, those deities, by the way, they were graced the second Pandal, and you can see them in Chicago, they're Kishore Kishori. But then, he had gone to lunch over at Kartikeya Mahadevi's, and I was also accompanying because I was his cook otherwise, so that day I wasn't cooking, I went to the lunch with him. And he's talking with Kartikeya, and he turns to me and he goes, so you have some deities, small? How did he know that? I said, yes. He said, you can bring them and give them to Kartikeya. And I mean, when I look back at how amazing that little transaction was, because first of all, how did he know that? I mean, it wasn't, I didn't tell anybody, but he knew it, somehow he knew it. And he relieved me of any offense of thinking that I could worship Radha and Krishna under the circumstance, you know, running around as I was at the time with my small daughter. He took care of it very nicely. And a few years ago, I happened to meet some of the children of Kartikeya, and I asked about those deities that were, as far as I would say, they were not only given, but they were installed by intention by Srila Prabhupada. And the family was still worshiping those deities. So, Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.